It is a report that leaves both archaeologists and pre-astronautic experts speechless. Two scientists from Italy and Scotland have used radar technology to detect gigantic underground shafts and multi-story structures beneath the Giza Plateau. According to experts, the mysterious structures are said to reach a depth of almost 650 meters and extend over a total length of 2,000 meters. But what could they possibly be? Did the ancient Egyptians really build a hidden city under the pyramids? Was it perhaps not the inhabitants of the Pharaonic Empire who created this invisible network? And why is the discovery described as groundbreaking by some researchers, while others remained highly skeptical? From a purely official historical point of view, the matter seems clear. Built around 4,500 years ago, the colossal pyramids of Giza are nothing more than oversized pharaonic tombs. But in certain circles, and this is the astonishing thing, the true purpose of these stone giants is interpreted somewhat differently. This is particularly true of the overwhelming Cheops, or simply Great Pyramid, for where neither mystical texts for the dead nor precious grave goods, let alone a royal mummy, have been found, the pharaonic temple theory no longer seems tenable. Instead, according to the far-fetched theory, the pyramids are actually ancient power plants that testify to the outstanding technological abilities of the ancient Egyptians, and also support the assumption that the inhabitants of antiquity encountered one or two aliens. And so it is that the images of the sensational new underground discovery are sometimes juxtaposed with pictures of modern reactor rods in order to at least give the interested viewer something to think about. But what on earth did the researchers actually find beneath the Giza Plateau? Are we really dealing with a hidden city that leads us straight to an incredible historical truth? Could the hidden network even be connected to the legendary Hall of Records? Well, let's take a look at things in order. The discovery was made by Italian Corrado Malanga from the University of Pisa and Filippo Biondi from the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. And to give you an idea of the direction of this archaeological journey might take, it's worth mentioning that Malanga is also extensively involved in UFO research alongside his academic work. Biondi, on the other hand, specializes in radar technology. And so it came about that the two researchers used synthetic aperture radar, or SAR technology for short, to analyze radar waves reflected from the Earth beneath the Giza Plateau. We are therefore dealing with a satellite-based remote sensing method. However, in this case, it was not the area around the mysterious Pyramid of Cheops that caught the scientists' attention, but the area below the Pyramid of Chephren, which still stands 136 meters high today and is thus the second tallest of all the Giza structures. Based on the data collected by Malanga and Biondi, three-dimensional images were created, which are currently going viral on the internet, and which show us something that should not actually exist in this form. The secrets of the megastructure. The images currently circulating on social media show 8 vertical, cylindrical shafts or tubes surrounded by spiral structures and said to extend almost 650 meters to the ground. To put this into perspective, the Pyramid of Cheops, which for thousands of years was the tallest structure in the world, stood only 146.6 meters above its surroundings when it was completed. In other words, we are dealing with structures that are 4.5 times larger than the largest stone colossus on the Giza Plateau. But that's not all. In addition to the mysterious megashafts, Malanga and Biondi also claim to have identified a series of multi-story structures that appear to be connected by passageways. All in all, the entire network is said to extend around 2,000 meters beneath all 3 main pyramids. And given these overwhelming dimensions and the completely unexpected nature of the discovery, the project's spokesperson, Nicole Ciccolo, described it as, quote, groundbreaking, and hinted that our understanding of archaeological research and the limits of satellite data analysis could change radically in the future. But how did the ancient Egyptians manage to do this? How did people several millennia ago manage to penetrate such enormous depth? It is well known that the above-ground evidence of the Egyptians still presents us with enormous mysteries today. After all, we still cannot say with absolute certainty how the ancient workers transported the pyramid blocks, which weighed tons, hundreds of kilometers away, and then piled them into structures that were as huge as they were almost ridiculously precise. But now, the construction mystery of the inhabitants of the Pharaonic Empire has apparently spread underground. The strange tubes, shafts, wells, or whatever they are, also lead to two cube-shaped objects with edges measuring around 80 meters. And let's not forget, the ancient Egyptians, who emerged virtually straight out of the Stone Age and didn't even use the wheel to build their pyramids, are supposed to have created mechanical structures underground with their simple copper chisels and hammers that are simply spectacular even by today's standards. The question of whether this was even possible with the official means available at the time seems at least not entirely far-fetched. But what purpose could this huge complex have served? Well, it is clear that we can only speculate about this at this point, but it is also clear that the alternative theories about the pyramids of Giza seem astonishing, to say the least. Of course, there is the power plant theory, which is based on the assumption that the structures were not pharaonic tombs at all, but served as ancient energy generators. Even a certain inventor named Nikola Tesla is said to have believed that the ancient stone giants were connected to breathtaking technology. But there are even more unconventional theories. U.S. author Joseph P. Farrell actually sees the Great Pyramid as something like an ancient Death Star, more precisely, a weapon of mass destruction. At the end of the day, however, these astonishing interpretations are nothing more than sensational theories, and the principle applies that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So what supports the claim that structures lie dormant beneath the hot desert soil of the Giza Plateau that far exceed the presumed technical skills of the ancient Egyptians? Well, interestingly, there are even ancient sources that suggest that this sensational discovery is real. In this regard, the Greek historian Herodotus stated that 10 years were spent constructing the caves and passages underneath the Giza Plateau for the construction of the pyramids. According to Herodotus, the actual pyramids took 20 years to build, and as we can see, we therefore have a historical source that at least states that something was built underneath the pyramids. The work of a lost precursor culture? But what if the enormous underground structure did not actually exceed the capabilities of the ancient Egyptians? And not because the Egyptians were technologically more advanced than commonly assumed, but because it was not the Egyptians who left behind this confusing testimony to history. You have probably heard of the theory of a lost precursor culture. According to alternative researchers such as Graham Hancock, there was a highly advanced civilization long before our time which was almost completely wiped out by a flood at the end of the last ice age. The few survivors then spread out to the rest of the world to bring the gift of civilization to simpler peoples, and they are said to have left their mark in ancient Egypt. This refers in particular to the Sphinx, which is said to be several millennia older than officially taught, and which allegedly hides a secret of revolutionary proportions. For in fact, access to the legendary Hall of Records is said to lie dormant before the paws of the stone hybrid creature, and with it access to a legendary library where all the knowledge of the lost predecessor culture is stored. But of course, the pre-astronautics enthusiasts also threw their hats into the ancient Egyptian ring with a certain regularity. According to this parascience, the ancient Egyptians were by no means under the influence of just any culture, but were in lively exchange with extraterrestrial beings who were sometimes worshipped as gods and sometimes unceremoniously elevated themselves to the pharaonic throne. Well, so far so crazy, so highly speculative. But how does conservative research actually explain the structure beneath the Giza Plateau? Do the long-established experts also refer to the use of ropes, ramps, and sheer muscle power at this point? Well, not quite, because among all the alternative theories, we mustn't forget that Malanga and Biondi's study results are by no means free from criticism. Quite the contrary. Lawrence Conyers, a radar specialist from the University of Denver, states, for example, that the SAR technology used is not capable of penetrating the ground to such depths. Conyers therefore considers the claim that a full-blown underground city is hidden beneath the pyramids of Giza to be grossly exaggerated, although we can imagine that there are at least smaller structures such as shafts, caves, or chambers, which would not, however, shake the foundations of our historical worldview. But no matter which camp you belong to, one thing is certain: we will only be able to recognize the full significance of the discovery if we carry out targeted excavations. Well, provided that these are approved by the Egyptian government, of course. The ancient Egyptians are always good for a mystery. As we know, we still cannot say with absolute certainty how the inhabitants of the Pharaonic Empire managed to transport pyramid blocks weighing tens of tons, sometimes hundreds of kilometers, and then pile them up into stone monuments for eternity. The Pyramid of Cheops alone consists of around 2.65 million blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, but that's just the average. For the construction of the so-called King's Chamber, colossal blocks of rose granite weighing between 40 and 70 tons had to be maneuvered to dizzying heights and then fitted into place with precision. But that's not all. After its completion, the 146-meter-high stone giant not only stood as the tallest structure in the world for several millennia, but was also aligned precisely with the 4 cardinal directions, with the difference in the lengths of the sides not even amounting to 1/1000th. How the Egyptians achieved this architectural feat in detail is another matter entirely. Conservative researchers point to a sophisticated system of ropes, ramps, and sheer muscle power, but less conservative researchers suspect that the inhabitants of ancient times actually possessed technologies that we cannot even dream of today. And once the door has been opened to such alternative theories, it is not far to another astonishing thesis, that the pyramids were not oversized tombs for pharaohs at all, but rather ancient power stations. And indeed, the world of these far-fetched interpretations now seems to have been given further fuel. Italian Corrado Malanga from the University of Pisa and Filippo Biondi from the Scottish University of Strathclyde recently announced that they had found something underground on the Giza Plateau that eclipses everything we know. Specifically, the researchers used synthetic aperture radar technology, a satellite-based remote sensing method to uncover the underground secrets of Giza with the help of radar waves. The data collected was then used to create three-dimensional images that show us a gigantic structure deep underground that dwarfs even the most impressive above-ground structures. Did the Egyptians build a secret city? But what exactly is hidden underground? Well, Filippo Biondi is quoted as saying the following in the official statement. The images show 8 cylindrical structures that we have identified as shafts. They are arranged in 2 parallel rows and surrounded by descending spiral passages. We found them under each of the 3 pyramids, and they appear to serve as access points to this underground system. Pretty exciting, isn't it? However, it becomes even more impressive when we consider the dimensions of the structures according to Biondi and Malanga. After all, the shafts are said to reach a depth of no less than 648 meters and lead to 2 cube-shaped objects, each with edges measuring 80 meters. But that's not all. The entire network is said to extend over around 2,000 meters. In view of this, Nicole Ciccolo, the official press spokeswoman for the project, described the significance of the discovery as groundbreaking, which is not really surprising since we are dealing here with a completely unexpected bombshell that could suddenly turn the history of ancient Egypt on its head. And yet the question remains, what exactly did the Egyptians create here? Well, fortunately, the internet is never at a loss for explanations, no matter how astonishing. Which is why the 3D images of the site have already been juxtaposed with photos of modern reactor rods to support the power plant theory. Others, however, consider it more likely that the ancient Egyptians built a full-scale city out of, or rather into, the ground. A city that may be connected to the legendary Hall of Records. Officially, no such Hall of Records exists, but unofficially, and this is the exciting part, it is said to be a mystical underground library where all the knowledge of a mysterious pre-human civilization is stored. Yes, you heard right. In certain circles, it has long been considered proven that long before our time, a highly developed people lived on Earth who had a significant influence on the rise of other civilizations. But before we get too carried away with the alternative interpretations of history, we should first address a more fundamental question. Is Biondi and Malanga's discovery really as groundbreaking as it is currently being claimed? Why the discovery of the century is being criticized? Well, the question of the accuracy of the research results seems entirely justified. First and foremost, there is the fact that the study in question has not yet been published in a scientific journal, which is unusual to say the least, as such spectacular discoveries are usually only announced after they have been critically reviewed by other experts. And then, of course, there is the synthetic aperture radar, or SAR technology, used in the study. Is it even possible to penetrate so deep into the ground with radar waves reflected from the Earth, and then to draw such a detailed picture of the structures there? Well, that is precisely the question that Lawrence Conyers, a radar specialist at the University of Denver, answers with a resounding no, because SAR technology is simply not capable of doing so. In fact, radar technology has a fundamental problem in that the deeper the signals have to penetrate the ground, the weaker they become. And just to remind you, the mysterious underground shafts are said to reach a depth of almost 650 meters, and thus into a region that far exceeds the capabilities of our current radar technologies. Against this background, Conyers considers the claim that the Egyptians built a gigantic metropolis under the Giza Plateau is therefore considered by Conyers to be a gross exaggeration. But in the same breath, he considers it conceivable that there could be at least smaller structures such as caves, shafts, or chambers, which, however, do not have the potential to throw everything we thought we knew about the technical skills of the Egyptians into chaos. And yet, from a purely historical point of view, it does not seem entirely implausible that at least something lies dormant beneath the pyramids of Giza. The Greek historian Herodotus stated that 10 years of pyramid construction were spent creating the caves and passages beneath the Giza Plateau. And even today, the hot desert soil has revealed one or two exciting secrets. In 2017, for example, a research team used muons, particles created when cosmic radiation hits the Earth's atmosphere, to identify a previously unknown cavity in the Pyramid of Cheops. In May last year, reports circulated that a Japanese-Egyptian team had detected an extensive L-shaped structure in the ground of the Western Cemetery of Giza. Detailed investigations using ground-penetrating radar revealed that the structure measures 10 by 10 meters, lies at a depth of 2 meters, and extends another 5 to 10 meters underground. However, a key difference between Biondi Amalanga's discovery and the findings of 2017 and 2024 is that the latter were published in official journals and are therefore recognized by the rest of the scientific community. Added to this is the fact that the L structure was identified using so-called electrical resonance tomography, a method that is significantly more accurate than SAR technology. But let's just assume for now that Biondi Amalanga's spectacular findings are ultimately true. That the decision to go public with the study results instead of having them reviewed by independent experts first was very unusual, but that there was no ulterior motive. How else could we possibly uncover the true extent of the mysterious underground city? Well, to Lawrence Conyers, there is only one reliable way. He says, the only way to prove the accuracy and full significance of the find would be through targeted excavations. So, are Biondi and Malanga already standing by with their shovels? Well, not quite, because such targeted excavations would first have to be approved by the Egyptian government. When and whether that will happen at all is still anyone's guess. So, what can we conclude? Well, on the one hand, it is currently questionable, to put it cautiously, whether the underground structure of Giza is really as gigantic as its discoverers claim. Until we have physical evidence, the question remains whether the supposed city is not rather the result of a fatal misinterpretation of measurement data. But on the other hand, and this is the exciting part, the Giza Plateau has repeatedly shown us that it hides structures that no one knew about before, and we may have only just begun to uncover the full extent of this mysterious underground world. We have decoded the genome, we have conquered diseases that once meant certain death, and we are looking deeper than ever into the secrets of the universe with technological masterpieces like the James Webb Telescope. And yet, despite all this, we are unable to understand how people managed to build an oversized pile of stones 4,500 years ago. Okay, admittedly, this sharp-tongued formulation probably doesn't do full justice to the mystery surrounding the ancient Egyptian pyramids, and yet we still can't say with absolute certainty how the ancients managed to build their stone colossuses out of the ground in detail. Conservative historians point to the ingenious combinations of ramps, rope devices, and sheer muscle power. But given that the Great Pyramid consists of around 2.65 million stone blocks, some of which weigh up to 70 tons and were quarried 800 kilometers away, the alternative camp believes it is more likely that we are dealing with the result of a lost advanced technology. And where the idea of simple hammering and chiseling has been abandoned, the actual purpose of the Great Pyramid is also massively questioned. According to the current doctrine, it is the final resting place of the pharaoh Cheops, and this despite the fact that the structure is so different from the typical tombs of its time. Specifically, no mystical funerary texts or precious grave goods, let alone a royal mummy, have been found here. All that has been brought to light so far at the heart of the Great Pyramid was a granite ball, a hook, and some pieces of cedar wood. Incidentally, the wood fragments were rediscovered by chance in the Museum of Aberdeen a few years ago, and subsequent analysis revealed that they are not 4,500 years old at all, but over 5,000 years old. In other words, the wood is half a millennium older than the pyramid itself. But how can that be? Well, either the material was so rare and precious back then that it was reused for centuries, or it shows us that we were way off base with the original age dating of the Great Pyramid. But perhaps the answers to all the open pyramid questions are still hidden in the belly of the stone giant. You may well remember how, in early 2023, researchers tracked down a previously unknown chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. And while the original purpose of the 9-meter-long and 2.3-meter-high cavity is still completely unknown, the question of what lies behind it is even more significant for experts. Because there is one thing we must not forget. Despite the fact that this architectural wonder has been towering on the Giza Plateau for thousands of years, only 10% of the Great Pyramid of Giza has been explored so far. Where missing bowls become a problem. And who knows, maybe something like an instruction manual is hidden in the pyramid, explaining how the monumental structure can be switched on. Yes, you heard right, because assuming that enigmatic illustrations such as the light bulbs of Dendera actually show fully functional high-tech machines, many an alternative mind considers it conceivable that the Great Pyramid of Giza is in fact a gigantic power plant. This is an admittedly surprising interpretation, but it also does not stop at the Serapeum in Saqqara. Officially, however, we are dealing here with an underground Apis bull tomb, which was built at the behest of Chimawesset around 1250 BC. But while the pyramids of Giza have been visible to everyone on the Giza Plateau for at least 4,500 years, in this case, it took until the 1850s for the archaeological treasure to be awakened from its long slumber. The rediscovery of the Serapeum is attributed to the French Egyptologist Auguste Mariette, and he was amazed when he saw the 24 huge granite sarcophagi in the underground complex. However, Mariette was even more astonished when he saw that most of the lids had been pushed to the side, and that every trace of their contents was missing. And let's be clear about this. According to the experts, each stone monster weighs between 70 and 80 tons, complete with the 20 to 30 ton lids. But the matter becomes even more astounding when we consider that the granite boxes do not consist of countless individual parts. They were always carved out of a single block. However, since the Apis bulls were considered the embodiment of the creator god Ptah in ancient Egypt, this elaborate form of burial may have been in keeping with their extraordinary status. But why is there actually no trace of the sacred animals? Well, the long-established researchers explain this with the work of Coptic monks who once entered the Serapeum and destroyed the bull mummies to put an end to the cult of Apis. But how the rioting brothers in faith managed to drag the animal corpses through the narrow crevices is another matter entirely. Incidentally, the same also applies to the question of why they even bothered to push the lid back on the sarcophagus in one case. While Mariette explored the Serapeum, one coffin was still closed. And since the Egyptologist and his companions were unable to move the massive lid by hand, they ultimately had to blow a hole in the granite box to reveal the interior. However, this sarcophagus was also empty, or should we say, this battery. As already mentioned, the Serapeum is also suspected in certain circles of being something quite different from what our history books lead us to believe. Accordingly, we would also have to deal here with the lost technology of antiquity, and with a technology that served the artificial generation of light. A pretty far-out theory, but it still sounds far less disturbing than the idea that monstrous creatures, such as the biblical Nephilim, were once locked away in the Serapeum. The mysteries of the Osiris tomb. Not even the god of the dead is safe from death. Although Osiris was considered the ruler of the afterlife in ancient Egyptian mythology, he was murdered and dismembered by his own brother, Seth. Fortunately for the deceased, he had a wife, Isis, who collected his scattered remains and brought him back to life. So far, so supernatural. But in truth, belief in the gods was so firmly anchored in the culture of the ancient Egyptians that they even dedicated an entire tomb complex to Osiris. This is hidden under the desert floor of the Giza Plateau and was brought back to light by Salim Hassan in 1933. But, strictly speaking, this sensational find could actually have been made much earlier. Well, if only we had believed the accounts of ancient historians, that is. Herodotus actually described the mystical tomb of the gods as early as 430 BC in his Second Book of Histories. The ancient Greek mentioned in detail that there is an artificial lake in the lowest level of the complex, complete with an island where Pharaoh Cheops was buried. And lo and behold, the deepest chamber of the Osiris tomb is indeed dripping wet, and also contains a sarcophagus, which, in the best Serapeum tradition, is completely empty. But even if we ignore the missing mummies, a fundamental question arises. Why is the tomb called the Osiris tomb if, according to Herodotus, Cheops was buried here? As is well known, the king already had a very special, not exactly modest tomb in the form of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Well, perhaps this is the reason why most researchers, contrary to Herodotus' statements, cling to the idea that we are dealing here with a symbolic tomb for the mighty god of the dead. At the same time, however, the experts do not know what the cramped shaft, which is just 40 by 40 centimeters in size, can be reached via the eastern wall of the Osiris burial chamber is all about. It apparently leads east towards the Sphinx. Where is the labyrinth hidden? Given that Herodotus' statement about the Osiris tomb were ultimately confirmed by reality, the question arises as to whether we are really well advised to simply relegate his reports of the monumental labyrinth to the realms of myths and legends. After all, the ancient historian was by no means the only one to report the existence of this legendary structure. In fact, Herodotus is said to have personally marveled at the stunning complex during his trip to Egypt. But just listen for yourself. Quote, "I have seen the labyrinth, which surpasses everything that has been said about it. If one were to take all the similar walls and other buildings in Greece, they would not equal the cost and labor expended on this one labyrinth. The pyramids, of course, defy description, and each of them is the equal of many of the great works of the Greeks. But the labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids." At the same time, Herodotus reported that the labyrinth had 12 covered courtyards with gates on the opposite sides, and that it was enclosed by a single wall. Furthermore, the structure had a whopping 3,000 rooms, which were divided equally into above-ground and underground chambers. However, during his visit to the labyrinth, Herodotus was only allowed to see the chambers above ground. The Greek only heard stories about the underground chambers where the sacred crocodiles and the kings were buried. The situation was somewhat different in the case of the huge pyramid and the so-called Lake Moeris, on the banks of which the labyrinth was located. And while Herodotus described the site as an almost superhuman work that would have easily made the list of ancient wonders of the world, the question arises as to why there is no trace of the labyrinth today. Well, but is there any at all? In 2008, the members of the Maharara expedition suspected the location of the structure to be in Harara. And, indeed, they discovered an extensive site at a depth of 10 meters, which had huge chambers, large halls, and meter-thick walls. The experts then published their exciting research results in a scientific journal and presented them at the University of Ghent. But, mysteriously, nothing more has happened since then. The site has not been professionally investigated since 2008, so we still don't know the exact background to this remarkable find. 3 ancient record holders meet. What may sound like the beginning of a joke at first is actually a remarkable fact, because the gigantic stone blocks enthroned in the quarry at Baalbek in present-day Lebanon are among the largest known monoliths in the world. No less remarkable is the fact that the third monolith was only discovered in 2014, and who knows what other stone giants the excavations will bring to light in the future. Well, so far no one. But looking back, the history of research into the Stone of the Pregnant Woman is all the more older. After all, it was already mentioned in the early 16th century by the knight Martin Baumgartner. Accordingly, we have known for quite some time that the oversized limestone block is a good 20 meters long, over 5 meters wide in places, and more than 4 meters high. Taking into account its density, the experts ultimately concluded that the monolith weighs a good 1,000 tons, which is still a few hundred kilos less than its even more massive counterparts. Accordingly, the weight of the monoliths that were brought to light in the 90s and 2014, and which, in contrast to the Pregnant Woman's Stone, did not receive an official name, is even estimated at 1,240 and 1,650 tons, respectively. But what was the point of them anyway? Who went to the trouble of hewing these almost laughably large structures out of the ground, and what purpose did they serve? As mentioned at the beginning, the Romans are considered to be the creators of the mega monoliths. No wonder, since the corresponding quarry is only 900 meters away from the temple complexes of Baalbek, which were built between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD and are considered a prime example of Roman monumental architecture. In light of this, most historians assume that the 3 monoliths were also to be brought to the sacred temple district to form the foundation of another colossal building. But while a distance of 900 meters doesn't really sound like an insurmountable distance at first, this changes abruptly when you have over 1,000 tons in your luggage. So how did the Romans plan to move their gigantic loads from A to B? Well, we simply don't know. Since we have no historical records in this regard, the experts have no choice but to delve into the realm of speculation and theories. However, this would require a sound theory. But so far, there simply isn't one. In fact, the relevant specialist texts merely state that the reasons for the planned stone transport are unclear. However, it seems that the often invoked idea of wooden rollers or sleds reaches its limit in this case. After all, they would have immediately sunk into the sandy ground or broken under the immense weight of the monoliths. In the same breath, however, the experts emphasize that it was possible in the past to move enormous objects over long distances despite this, and, it should be noted, without the use of lost advanced technologies. In particular, the researchers refer to the obelisk in St. Peter's Square, which was moved to its new location in 1586 with the help of 900 workers, 150 horses, and 47 winches. And yet, it is worth noting that the rose granite monolith weighs only 320 tons, over 1,300 tons less than the heaviest of the Baalbek monoliths. Well, but maybe that's exactly why the 3 extra large chunks never made it out of the quarry. Because in the end, the Romans may have had to admit to themselves that they had overestimated themselves with their architectural megalomania and left unfinished. This is a perfectly understandable explanation, but it has a small but crucial catch. If we now take our eyes off the quarry and turn them to the actual temple complex, we see that the Romans did manage to transport monoliths of this size and fit them into their monumental buildings. The enigmatic blocks of the Temple of Jupiter. Great God, great temple. After all, there was no other deity in the Roman religion that stood above Jupiter. It is therefore not particularly surprising that this special divine position is also reflected in the Jupiter sanctuary at Baalbek. And in the end, there stood a temple here that was almost 290 meters long, 20 meters high, and had 54 columns, which probably made every observer freeze in awe. And although the Temple of Jupiter was one of the largest complexes in the entire Roman Empire, this was probably not only due to the astonishing dimensions of the complex, but also to its gigantic podium, which still fuels the wildest speculation to this day. This consists of the so-called trilithon, and thus of 3 blocks that are considered to be the largest stones ever used in the world. Just imagine, experts estimate that each of these colossal blocks weighs around 800 tons. But that's not all. The trilithon is by no means the bottom layer of the podium. Instead, it sits on a layer of additional stone blocks, each of which weighs 350 tons. In other words, the Romans in the 1st century AD must somehow have managed to shape the 800-ton blocks in the quarry several hundred meters away, then bring them to the temple district, and then maneuver them into place to set them on the underlying layer. And if we look even more closely, we see that the stones of the trilithon were by no means placed next to each other any old how, but fit together so perfectly that not even a sheet of paper would fit between them. But how is that even possible? In the photos of the platform and the quarry monoliths, the adults standing in front of them look like puny dwarves. So could it be that the Romans had some kind of lost advanced technology that enabled them to complete these architectural wonders? Well, surprisingly, even the alternative minds answer this question with a definite no. Not because they point to a combination of pulleys, ropes, and sheer muscle power instead, but to the theory that it was not the Romans at all who created and moved the mega monoliths. The work of a lost civilization? According to one ancient legend, a certain Romulus began the construction of the Temple of Jupiter to thank the gods for a great victory on the battlefield. However, according to another legend, the legendary co-founder of Rome had nothing to do with the creation of the original complex, for the simple reason that it had long since come into existence by the time the Romans arrived in Baalbek. In other words, the Romans simply used the pre-existing podium to build their own shrines on top of it. A, well, admittedly bold guess, but what arguments do the alternative historians have to offer? Well, for one thing, there is simply no contemporary source that reports when and how exactly the Temple of Jupiter was built, or who commissioned its construction. The fact that we are dealing with the work of the Romans is therefore nothing more than an established assumption and not a proven fact. Furthermore, the complex features a wide range of construction methods. While countless smaller blocks were used in some places, much larger stones catch the eye in others. A uniform pattern would look different, and in this respect, some components with their unusual appearance would even seem to suggest that they originally belonged to a completely different structure. And then there is also the location problem. Baalbek is located over 2,200 kilometers from Rome. So why would the Romans have decided to build their largest stone wonders so far from the heart of their empire? In fact, the heaviest monolith we find there is the Trajan's Column, which was erected in honor of the Roman Emperor Trajan and weighs just 53 tons. In other words, the trilithic blocks are 15 times heavier than the imperial honorary monument. And if we take a closer look at other magnificent Roman buildings, such as the Colosseum, we quickly realize that the Romans used a combination of countless small blocks for these structures, and not full-grown giants, each weighing as much as 7 to 8 blue whales. Moreover, even in the conservative world of research, there is no question that the Romans were by no means the first to leave their mark in Baalbek. Archaeological investigations have shown that the human settlement history of the region goes back at least 11,000 years and did not begin in the 1st century AD. For a hypothetical precursor civilization, this would have been more than enough time to literally lay the foundation for the later Roman buildings. It is undisputed that the colossi of Baalbek are still accompanied by some question marks, and yet we should not forget that the same would apply to the case of an unknown creator culture. Because here too, we would neither know how the people of the distant past managed to create the giant monoliths, nor how they subsequently transported and placed them. So what remains to be said in conclusion? Well, one thing is certain: the discussions about the true background of the ancient monumental buildings will not stop anytime soon. But it is also clear that the giant structures remind us once again how much there is yet to learn about the lives of our ancestors in the future. and that they open up a fascinating, vivid window on days long gone. What were the pyramids really, and who built them? Never before have there been more legitimate doubts about the old theories that the three Great Pyramids of Giza are tombs. The buildings are too functional, too empty, too unadorned to have really been mausoleums for great rulers. More and more scientists around the world are questioning these explanations and searching meticulously for new answers. Researchers from the universities of Pisa and Strathclyde have now investigated the Giza Plateau using advanced satellite radar technology. They scanned the complexes using seismic echo analysis and Doppler tomography. Both are ultra-modern methods that are otherwise used in planetary exploration or military reconnaissance. What the scans revealed calls into question everything that has been assumed about the pyramids up to now. The images showed several spiral shafts over 600 meters deep and two monumental cube structures with sides measuring 80 meters. Like the massive structures themselves, the passages beneath them are geometrically precise and thus clearly man-made. What could this mean? Some see the new findings as evidence of a forgotten civilization, others as another functional structure that could explain what the pyramids really were. The images are reminiscent of mythical concepts such as the Halls of Amenti or theories about pyramid-based energy generation. What was previously invisible has become visible. We live in a fantastic time. Today, technologies such as nanoparticle scans and other sophisticated measurement techniques are providing new insights into ancient mysteries. The race to decipher the true function of the pyramids has entered a new phase. In 2017, researchers used muon spectroscopy to discover a previously unknown cavity inside the Great Pyramid. Now it was the turn of the slightly smaller pyramid of Chephren, and here too, something previously unseen came to light. Instead of traditional excavation techniques, researchers Professor Corrado Malanga and Dr. Filippo Biondi relied on a combination of sophisticated measurement methods that have really been used in archaeology. Synthetic aperture radar is a technology normally used for military reconnaissance or planetary mapping. SAR works with satellites directly from orbit. The satellites send bundled radar pulses to Earth and measure the return of the signals. Over time and movement, this produces high-resolution, three-dimensional images of the subsurface. But the team went one step further. They combined SAR with Doppler tomography, which makes changes in waves visible as they pass through different materials. In addition, they used all the vibrations from natural microseismic activity at the site to complete the picture. The result was a kind of perfect X-ray view into the rock beneath the pyramid. What the scans revealed was astonishing. 8 spiral shafts, each over 600 meters deep, and 2 gigantic cube structures with sides measuring 80 meters. The shapes are geometrically precise and symmetrical, and the images also showed multi-layered halls, long corridors, and organically appearing tunnel passages. A complex system that was previously completely unknown. The mixture of clearly man-made and natural-looking caves and tunnels could indicate that the pyramids, along with the passageways and caves beneath them, were built on top of natural structures that may have already been used as a kind of cult site. Elevated Earth radiation or electromagnetic anomalies may have been perceived as a sacred place, even in ancient times. The new methods allow us to take a sharp look underground, but they also have some disadvantages. Although we can see the images, researchers cannot check or dig on site. This would require procedures and methods to penetrate the underground of the pyramids, and access is strictly regulated by the Egyptian authorities. Efforts to investigate the underground more closely have often been blocked or prohibited in the recent past. The Halls of Amenti, myths beneath stone and sand. Ideas that the pyramids were much more than just tombs are not new. Texts such as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth describe the so-called Halls of Amenti. The texts are said to originate from ancient circles of initiates and have been passed down for centuries only within very specific circles. According to these legends, the pyramids of Giza were not just burial sites, but gateways to hidden worlds. The Halls of Amenti are said to lie hidden from the world, deep beneath the pyramids, preserving ancient knowledge. The writings allegedly report on the power of consciousness, methods of spiritual healing, and the handling of energy. In the ancient mystical schools, the information from the halls is even said to have provided access to immortality. For a long time, such stories were considered pure metaphor, and people who spread this knowledge were dismissed as esoteric or crazy. But since evidence has mounted that the pyramids could not have been built in the way we know today, such information is being taken more seriously. There are theories that the buildings were made possible because their builders had knowledge of how matter is shaped and moved by consciousness. This could explain why we cannot explain the buildings using the physics and mathematics known and accepted today. The new scans under the Chefron Pyramid are now giving new fuel to theories such as these. The spiral shafts and geometric chambers that have been discovered are strikingly similar in structures to the mythological description of the Duat. This Egyptian underworld was depicted as a series of gates, trials, and halls, and long believed by Egyptologists to be a ritual path for the soul after death. But what if these concepts were not just symbolic, but based on real places? The Sphinx on the Giza Plateau is also surrounded by such ideas. According to some theories, it is said to have access to underground chambers. Reports from the 1930s speak of catacombs beneath the Sphinx that have never been fully explored. The so-called Osiris Shaft, a multi-story, water-filled tunnel near the Sphinx, may have been another access point. Initial investigations gave the impression of a hidden network beneath the plateau, but further investigations of the subsoil were prohibited by the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, allegedly because there was nothing there. Pyramids, stone machines, or luminous power stations? Were the pyramids gigantic power stations that glowed at night? Even the electrical genius Nikola Tesla speculated that the shape of the pyramid was capable of bundling and conducting the natural frequencies of the Earth. At the beginning of the 20th century, the inventor came up with the idea for a similar energy generation plant that used weak Earth voltage in combination with a water reservoir and certain minerals to bundle the power and transport it over long distances. The result was the Wardenclyffe Tower, which was supposed to be able to generate free electricity from the Earth and the air and make it available to people free of charge. Tesla built the tower on a geological feature that made it very easy to extract the Earth's electricity. The pyramids may have been similar. In the 1990s, engineer Christopher Dunn developed this idea further. In his book, The Giza Power Plant, he describes the Great Pyramid as a kind of resonance machine that could convert seismic vibrations into microwave energy. The shafts and chambers would act like organ pipes or resonance chambers, precisely tuned to geological faults and water veins deep underground. The new scans under Chefron reveal structures that are astonishingly close to this theory: spiral shafts leading deep underground and chambers whose size and shape could be acoustically effective. Some researchers suspect that this complex was intended to not only be symbolic, but also mechanical, perhaps for water regulation, energy generation, or even to influence states of consciousness. Whether machine or temple, the precision and depth of the structures suggest deliberate planning rather than coincidence. Whoever built them clearly had a goal that today's rational minds cannot easily comprehend. Conservative researchers still vehemently reject concepts such as power plants or the technical functionality of the pyramids, even though more and more evidence supports precisely such fantastical explanations. If the new hypotheses are correct, we would have to completely rethink our image of the ancient world. We would not be dealing with a primitive prehistory and a linear development of humanity, but with epochs in which advanced and then forgotten technologies and other basic physical conditions existed. Giza, why no one is allowed to dig there anymore. It is unbelievable how the Egyptian authorities are currently trying to cover up the results of the scans. Although the results of the scans under the Pyramid of Chefron were spectacular, they remain officially unconfirmed. The reason for this is not technical errors or doubts, but rather political and administrative obstacles. The entire Giza region is under the strict control of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt. Without express permission, no drilling, filming, or digging is allowed there, and it was precisely this permission that was missing for the scans. No one could prevent the work from being carried out, but the results are not officially recognized if permission was not granted in advance. The researchers have repeatedly tried to obtain permission, not only for the scans, but to lower a camera into one of the suspected shafts. However, the applications were ignored or rejected. The most prominent opponent of the project is Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's most famous Egyptologist and longtime Minister of Antiquities. He describes the scans as unscientific, unauthorized, and without archaeological value. For him, the only thing that counts is what has been confirmed by traditional excavation. Everything else is pure speculation. This stance has consequences. No access, no validation, no way to verify the data. The discovery thus remains officially in limbo, between digital evidence and a lack of archaeological reality. Fierce critics argue that radar images are not evidence. An echo is not a tunnel. A geometric shape is not a structure, as long as these structures have never actually been seen or entered. Of course, many voices are speaking out, quite rightly and once again, about a cover-up and the deliberate suppression of revolutionary new findings about the Giza Plateau. If it turns out that there is a structure beneath Chephren that predates the first dynasties of Egypt, it would shake the official historical narrative to its core. There are indeed people who are convinced that the true signs of the Pyramid of Cheops are being deliberately concealed from us. There is no doubt that the ancient stone giant is still shrouded in mystery today. How exactly did the inhabitants of ancient times manage to pile up thousands upon thousands of blocks weighing tons to create such an architectural masterpiece? And could the mysterious shafts in the Queen's Chamber possibly help us uncover the historical truth? Be sure to stay tuned until the end and see for yourself what the supposedly oldest cover-up in history is all about. Presumably, approximately, estimated. Anyone who delves into the official texts on the Cheops, or simply the Great Pyramid, will quickly notice that the relevant sources are full of vague formulations that leave room for interpretation. As briefly mentioned at the beginning, it is above all the question of the exact construction techniques used by the ancient Egyptians that continues to fuel the wildest speculations to this day. Because let's face it, the pyramids of Cheops consist of around 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. But that's just the average. The bottom line is that the inhabitants of the Pharaonic Empire managed to maneuver colossal blocks weighing up to 70 tons to dizzying heights and fit them precisely into their structures. Some of these extreme loads also came from quarries hundreds of kilometers away from the Giza Plateau. And yet, it is not only the overwhelming dimensions that transform the Pyramid of Cheops into an architectural marvel. With an original height of 146.6 meters, the pyramid was also aligned exactly to the 4 cardinal points, and with almost ridiculously precise sides whose length deviation is not even 1/1000th. How exactly the Egyptians achieved all this is not entirely clear. Although there are various theories, mainly based on ingenious ramp systems, none of them can be proven conclusively. But what about discoveries? What mystical funerary texts, precious grave goods, and royal mummies have already been unearthed here? Well, none at all. In fact, only 3 artifacts have ever been recovered from the Pyramid of Cheops to date. More precisely, in 1872, Scottish engineer Wayneman Dixon came across a ball, a hook, and a fragment of cedar wood. And that was it. Well, not quite, because radiocarbon dating of the piece of wood revealed that it is half a millennium older than the official date of construction of the pyramid itself. The official explanation for this is that the rare material was so precious at the time that it was simply reused for 500 years. The general lack of artifacts is attributed to tomb raiders who plundered the structure hundreds of years ago. But how is it that the pyramid is associated with Pharaoh Cheops of all people? Well, the attribution was made based on graffiti found by construction workers, particularly in the relief chambers, which contained the king's name inside the pyramid. Despite all this, the tomb theory has long been considered hopelessly outdated in alternative circles. And to understand why this is so, we need only compare the Pyramid of Cheops with those sites that were undoubtedly used for burials. These include the legendary Valley of the Kings near the ancient Egyptian city of Thebes. The tombs created here are characterized above all by large passageways and extensive galleries. The passageways of the pyramid, on the other hand, are so narrow that an adult can barely squeeze through. But the magnificent interior of the necropolis tombs, with their works of art and hieroglyphics, also differs markedly from the simple appearance of the Giza giant. Furthermore, in the heart of the pyramid, we also encounter things that literally make us sit up and take notice. Anyone entering the structure via the narrow corridor, which measures just 90 by 90 centimeters, and climbing up from there must negotiate a series of steps. However, this is a modern installation. Originally, there was nothing but a bare, steep rising passageway. Once you have mastered the narrow passage, you find yourself in the large gallery. Many visitors who enter the gallery, which is up to 8.74 meters high and a good 46 meters long, say that this section has some remarkable acoustic properties. Videos of this phenomenon can easily be found on YouTube, and we recommend everyone take a look, or rather a listen, to the relevant clips. Some people believe that the unique acoustics of the large gallery also suggest that it served a very special purpose that is unknown today. Officially, however, this area merely functions as a stabilizing element. Be that as it may, anyone hoping to find impressive decorations and hieroglyphics here will once again be disappointed. The mysteries of the sarcophagus. Anyone looking at a cross-section of the Pyramid of Cheops will inevitably be struck by a striking detail: the peculiar design of the so-called King's Chamber. In fact, it is the only royal burial chamber from the period between the 4th and 6th dynasties that has a flattened ceiling. Instead of constructing a gabled roof, as was customary, the builders decided to place 9 granite beams over 6 meters long on the walls, which required the construction of special relief chambers. But what was the reason behind this unique construction decision? The most significant feature of the King's Chamber is, of course, the sarcophagus. Although, as mentioned above, no mummy or grave goods have ever been found in the Pyramid of Cheops. The existence of the massive granite coffin leaves no doubt that this is clearly a burial site. Or is it? Well, at this point, critics point to a number of inconsistencies that are not so easy to place in a plausible context. Even conservative researchers agree that the construction of the sarcophagus, which was supposed to be the showpiece of the tomb, is significantly inferior to the design of the rest of the pyramid. Let's just compare the perfectly crafted stone blocks of the King's Chamber with the massive coffin. The rough shape and visible traces of workmanship leave the viewer with raised eyebrows. In view of this, some people even describe the sarcophagus with words such as shabby or inferior. And the fact that the coffin broke over time, leaving aside the exterior, leads some skeptics to believe that the sarcophagus was actually made much later than the pyramid. And when we look at older photographs of the King's Chamber, we see that there were other objects or pieces of rock lying around the sarcophagus. Given its massive appearance, is it really possible that these were pieces of the former coffin lid? The list of questions surrounding the supposed resting place of Pharaoh Cheops could go on and on. Why was the sarcophagus not placed in the center of the chamber? And what is the significance of the missing hieroglyphs and decorations? Well, these are questions that only the ancient Egyptians themselves probably knew the answers to. The mysterious Gantenbrink shaft. In addition to the King's Chamber, the Pyramid of Cheops is also known to contain the Queen's Chamber. But did you know that this room is not what its name suggests? In fact, this name, which is still in use today, dates back to a misinterpretation from an Arab period. The background to the shaft in this cavity is no less obscure. Located at a height of about 1.5 meters, they have a diameter of just 20 centimeters. And in fact, the passages, which have been sealed until then, were only rediscovered and forcibly opened by Wayman Dixon in 1872. In the process, the Scotsman also came across the 3 artifacts we mentioned earlier in the front part of the northern shaft. These objects are generally interpreted as so-called model grave goods, which were intended to serve as tools for Cheops in the afterlife. But why were the objects placed in a sealed shaft? Well, we don't know. What we do know, however, is that the northern shaft is blocked, by an iron bar after about 20 meters. The purpose of this barrier is unclear. Officially, it is said that it may have been left behind by Dixon when he explored the passages. In any case, due to this obstacle, the team led by German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink decided in 1993 to first take a closer look at the southern shaft. After about 2.3 meters, it makes a steep 40-degree turn. About 60 meters further on, the robot vehicle that was sent in came face to face with a polished limestone block. As this is adorned with two heavily weathered copper fittings, many observers see it as a kind of door. But in order to finally look behind the stone barrier, it had to be drilled through in 2002. However, the researchers only discovered another small cavity, which presumably marks the end of the shaft. In the same year, however, the northern shaft was also investigated further, and the experts once again detected a stone block with copper fittings that made it impossible to proceed any further. Ultimately, it was not until 2011 that the blocking stone and the small chamber behind it were investigated again, and with the help of the robot Jedi, which was equipped with a movable endoscope, the experts made some exciting discoveries this time. The new panoramic view revealed that the back of the barrier is also smoothly polished, with the copper fittings forming two eyelets. In addition, Jedi captured some red markings on the floor of the small chamber. However, the significance of these markings has not yet been conclusively clarified. They are construction worker graffiti. Well, probably, that is. Apart from that, however, there is of course another question that arises. What was the purpose of the mysterious shafts in the Queen's chamber? Why did the ancient Egyptians decide to create small passageways that lead to proverbial nowhere? And why were they later sealed again? If these were ventilation shafts, it seems surprising, to say the least, that they do not lead to the outside. An alternative theory suggests that these are the very corridors through which, according to belief, the pharaoh's soul ascended to heaven. The passages showed the king the way to the immortal stars of the northern sky, but in order for the ruler to embark on this journey, false doors or ritual corridors were needed. But if the shafts of the Queen's chamber really served this purpose, whether as actual burial corridors or as so-called model corridors, why do they end 15 meters before the outside? Wouldn't the pharaoh's soul then have ended up in a dead end? Furthermore, there would have been no need for a passage leading south to ascend to the northern sky. In fact, we know of no other pyramid that has such a corridor orientation. Furthermore, we should not ignore another important point. The pyramid texts on which our assumptions about the ancient Egyptians' beliefs about the afterlife are based were not handed down until 250 years after the construction of the supposed tomb of Cheops. Your new subscription will be activated immediately after clicking. Simply press the thumb icon and subscribe to never miss another video from us. See you soon!